In the brooding shadow of the Carpathian Mountains, where an ethereal mist perpetually veils ancient stone and forgotten whispers slither through abandoned halls, looms a castle guarding a secret that stains the very fabric of history. For 3 decades, young peasant girls, lured by promises of service to nobility, passed through its formidable gates, only for many to vanish, swallowed by the darkness within. The mistress of this ominous fortress, shielded by a feudal system that placed her far beyond the reach of earthly justice, would become synonymous with a terror that still chills the soul. Countess Elizabeth Bathory, born into the heart of Hungarian power in 1560, commanded an influence that extended far beyond the imposing stone walls of her castle. In an era defined by feudal law, granting nobles near absolute dominion over their serfs, she ruthlessly exploited every legal loophole designed to protect her privileged station. The very social structure intended to maintain order became the twisted instrument that enabled what many historians believe to be the horrifying legacy of the most prolific female serial killer in recorded history. The tales emanating from Castle Čachtice are not merely disturbing, they defy human comprehension. Eyewitness accounts speak of clandestine torture chambers where young girls endured suffering beyond imagination, their screams lost in the echoing stone. Witnesses whispered of elaborate instruments of pain, icy chambers of despair, and acts of unspeakable brutality that stretched the boundaries of human cruelty, testing the very limits of endurance. Most unnervingly, stories circulated of bite marks discovered on the ravaged bodies of victims, whispers of a predator who, in acts of symbolic cannibalism, consumed the flesh of her prey, as though seeking to absorb their life force and vitality. For decades, a suffocating veil of fear, enforced by the unwavering might of feudal law, silenced the desperate cries emanating from within the castle walls. Parents, bereft of their daughters, dared not voice their anguish against the ruling nobility, lest they too become victims of her insatiable cruelty. Local officials, bound by the unbreakable chains of class loyalty and legal constraints, deliberately averted their gaze from the mounting evidence, choosing self-preservation over justice. The law, designed to safeguard the innocent, instead became a shield for a monster, a perfect storm of privilege and predation where the cries of the vulnerable went unanswered. What malignant force drove a woman of such immense wealth and unassailable status to commit acts that shocked even the brutal sensibilities of her era? Was she truly the infamous Blood Countess, desperately bathing in the blood of virgins seeking to steal their youth and immortality? Or was this horrifying legend a carefully constructed fabrication? A weapon wielded by envious enemies who coveted her vast and strategically important estates? The tantalizing line separating historical fact and politically motivated propaganda has blurred and shifted across 4 centuries, leaving us to meticulously assemble fragmented pieces of truth from testimonies tainted by the shadow of torture and coercion. In the year 1610, after 3 decades of hushed accusations and growing unrest, King Matthias II, finally compelled by circumstances, ordered a formal investigation that sent shockwaves through the Hungarian court. The horrors that investigators unearthed within the chilling confines of Castle Čachtice far surpassed even their darkest and most morbid expectations. The meticulously collected testimonies painted a grim portrait of systematic torture and murder on a scale that shattered belief, challenging the very foundations of human decency. Yet, even faced with such irrefutable evidence of her guilt, the same feudal law that had facilitated her heinous crimes continued to protect her from the full wrath of justice. While her vile accomplices faced brutal torture and agonizing execution, the Countess herself was never formally tried, nor subjected to the indignity of public shaming. Her noble blood, it seemed, proved far thicker and more valuable than the innocent blood she had so casually spilled, and she was sentenced merely to house arrest within her castle walls, where she remained until death finally claimed her, a scant 4 years later. This is the chilling story of how feudal law served as the midwife to a perfect predator, how social hierarchy fueled systematic horror, and how the name of one woman became indelibly linked with the darkest corners of human depravity. It is a tale that compels us to confront the uncomfortable truths about the corrupting influence of power, the insidious nature of privilege, and the devastating price paid by those whom society deems expendable, their lives rendered worthless in the face of unchecked authority. Elizabeth Bathory's Hungary was a land torn asunder by the relentless clash of empires, caught in a brutal struggle where the expansionist Ottoman Turks pressed relentlessly from the south, while the increasingly dominant Habsburg influence encroached from the west. The Kingdom of Hungary in the late 16th century existed in a perpetual state of near-constant warfare, a society where violence had become tragically normalized and the value of human life fluctuated wildly, based solely on the capricious whims of birth and social standing. This was the brutal and unforgiving world that forged the woman who would forever be known as the Blood Countess, her name whispered in fearful reverence. The Bathory family stood as one of the most powerful and influential dynasties in all of Eastern Europe, their lineage stretching back centuries. They had produced kings, valiant princes, and legendary war heroes who had bravely defended Christendom against the relentless onslaught of Ottoman expansion. Elizabeth's own uncle, Stephen Bathory, ascended to rule as King of Poland and Grand Duke of Lithuania, wielding immense power and influence across vast territories. Her family commanded vast territories, maintained private armies that answered only to them, and moved within exclusive circles where power was absolute and accountability was a foreign concept. Born in 1560 at the family's ancestral seat in Nyrbtor, Elizabeth entered a world where her elevated status was never questioned, never doubted. The rigid feudal system that governed Hungarian society created an almost impenetrable structure of hierarchy, where nobles possessed rights and privileges that would be considered tyrannical by modern standards of justice and human decency. They administered justice on their sprawling lands, wielding even the power of capital punishment, with virtually no oversight from royal courts or external authorities. Serfs, for all intents and purposes, were treated as property, bound irrevocably to the land, and subject to the unfettered whims of their lord or lady. Elizabeth's childhood coincided with some of Hungary's darkest and most desperate hours. The catastrophic Battle of Moks in 1526 had shattered Hungarian independence, effectively dividing the once proud kingdom into three distinct parts, each ruled by a foreign power. The central region fell under the dominion of the Ottoman Turks, becoming a contested territory ravaged by constant warfare. The Western territories became a part of the vast Habsburg domain, their fate intertwined with the Austrian Empire. Only Transylvania, a remote and mountainous region, managed to maintain a semblance of semi-independence under the rule of Hungarian princes. This fragmentation of power irrevocably weakened central authority and emboldened local nobles, who increasingly became laws unto themselves, their actions unchecked and unpunished. The young Elizabeth received an education that was remarkably exceptional for women of her era. She was fluent in Hungarian, Latin, German, and even Greek, a testament to her sharp intellect and her family's commitment to her intellectual development. Contemporary accounts depict her as a woman of remarkable intelligence, undeniable charisma, and a keen awareness of her privileged position, a woman who understood how to manipulate the system to her advantage. At the tender age of 11, she was betrothed to Ferenc Indasti, the scion of another powerful and influential family, in a carefully orchestrated political alliance designed to unite two of Hungary's greatest fortunes and further consolidate their power. The society that Elizabeth inhabited was one of stark and often brutal contrasts, a world where unimaginable luxury existed alongside unimaginable suffering. While nobles lived lives of opulent luxury, engaging in philosophical discussions, commissioning exquisite works of art, and indulging in every conceivable pleasure, the vast majority of peasants endured lives of abject poverty and hardship, their conditions barely above the level of chattel slavery. The devastating Turkish wars had ravaged the countryside, leaving behind countless orphans and displaced families, their lives shattered by violence and loss. Young peasant girls, desperate for survival, often sought employment in noble households, viewing it as their only escape from starvation and destitution. This climate of desperation and vulnerability created a seemingly endless supply of victims for those inclined to abuse their power and exploit the vulnerable. Religious turmoil added another layer of complexity and division to this already violent and unstable era. The Protestant Reformation had swept through Hungary like a wildfire, irrevocably dividing families and communities along religious lines. Elizabeth's own family included both staunch Catholics and fervent Protestants, reflecting the intense religious tensions that permeated the period. Some historians suggest that these deep-seated religious conflicts may have even played a role in her eventual downfall, as the Catholic Habsburgs sought to undermine the power of Protestant Hungarian nobles, seizing upon the scandal as a means to achieve their political aims. The legal framework of feudal Hungary created a dangerous environment where crimes committed by nobles against commoners rarely faced any form of meaningful punishment. The concept of high justice granted lords the absolute right to execute serfs for a wide range of perceived offenses, their judgments rarely questioned or overturned. While technically subject to royal authority, nobles in practice operated with near-complete autonomy on their vast estates, their actions beyond reproach. This system, designed to maintain order in a decentralized kingdom, instead facilitated systematic abuse by those who were powerful enough to exploit it, leaving the vulnerable defenseless against their cruelty. Elizabeth married Ferenc Indasti in 1575, a union that solidified the power and wealth of both families. She was a mere 15 years old, while he was a seasoned 20. Known throughout Hungary as the Black Knight for his merciless brutality against Turkish forces, Ferenc was frequently absent from home on extended military campaigns, leaving Elizabeth as the sole authority over their sprawling estates, including the formidable Castle Čachtice and later the infamous Castle Čachtice. Contemporary sources suggest that Ferenc was fully aware of his wife's cruel tendencies, but he either tacitly approved of her actions or felt utterly powerless to intervene, his own brutality perhaps mirroring her own in a different arena. The marriage produced 5 children who survived to adulthood, suggesting that Elizabeth was capable of maintaining a facade of normality when necessary, projecting an image of a dutiful wife and mother to those outside her inner circle. Court records and surviving correspondence from this period paint a picture of a highly competent estate manager who skillfully expanded the family's wealth and influence, adept at navigating the complexities of noble life. She administered justice in local disputes, managed complex financial affairs with shrewdness and skill, and navigated the treacherous political landscape of a deeply divided kingdom with a keen understanding of the power dynamics at play. Yet beneath this carefully constructed veneer of noble respectability and dutiful competence, disturbing patterns were beginning to emerge. Dark whispers and hushed rumors circulating among the servants at the Indasti estates regarding the Countess's increasingly cruel treatment of the young female staff. Girls who entered her service often mysteriously disappeared, their fates shrouded in speculation, explained away as runaways or victims of the ever-present Turkish raids that plagued the countryside. Local priests began to notice an alarmingly high number of servant girls being hastily buried in the churchyards near the Bathory residences, their deaths attributed to illness or accident, but raising unsettling questions in the minds of those who witnessed these hurried and secretive burials. Ferenc Indasti died in 1604, his demise attributed to a festering infected wound sustained in battle, though rumors of poisoning circulated among the servants. His death removed the last semblance of restraint on Elizabeth's increasingly erratic behavior, unleashing a torrent of cruelty that would shock even the hardened sensibilities of her time. As a widow, she possessed even greater autonomy under Hungarian law, her power and influence unchecked. She controlled one of the kingdom's largest and most lucrative fortunes, commanded the unwavering loyalty of hundreds of retainers who depended on her for their livelihoods, and answered to no husband or male guardian, free to indulge her darkest impulses without fear of reprisal. The stage was now tragically set for a terrifying escalation in violence that would shock even a society inured to brutality and bloodshed. The imposing castle at Čachtice perched precariously on a jagged limestone cliff overlooking the sweeping Little Carpathians became Elizabeth's primary residence after her husband's death, transforming it into a place of unimaginable horror. Its remote and isolated location, formidable defenses, and significant distance from royal oversight made it the ideal setting for activities that demanded absolute secrecy, allowing her to indulge her sadistic impulses without fear of discovery. The fortress had been in the Bathory family for generations, its ancient stones silent witnesses to centuries of unchecked power and privilege, secrets buried deep within its foundations. Contemporary accounts describe Castle Čachtice as a place of profound dread among the local peasantry, a symbol of fear and oppression. Parents warned their daughters, often in vain, against accepting positions there, their instincts screaming at them to protect their children from the evil that lurked within. Even as grinding poverty made such warnings difficult to heed, the castle's isolation meant that whatever unspeakable acts occurred within its walls remained hidden from outside scrutiny, lost to the world beyond its imposing gates. In an age before modern communications, when information traveled slowly and often unreliably, a remote fortress could become a world unto itself, governed solely by the twisted desires of its master or mistress, their whims dictating the fate of those trapped within. The societal structure that enabled Elizabeth's alleged crimes reflected broader patterns of abuse that existed throughout feudal Europe, dark undercurrents that allowed the powerful to prey upon the vulnerable with impunity. Noble privilege created spaces where the law ceased to function as intended, where power became its own justification, and where the cries of the oppressed were systematically ignored. Countess Bathory was not unique in exploiting these inherent flaws in the system. She was simply the most extreme and horrifying example of what could happen when a sadistic personality was granted unchecked authority, their depravity unleashed upon the innocent. This historical context is crucial for understanding how someone could allegedly torture and kill for decades without facing intervention, their crimes shrouded in secrecy. Elizabeth Bathory was not operating in a vacuum, but within a deeply flawed system that prioritized noble privilege above all else, even the sanctity of human life. The very laws meant to organize society and maintain order instead created the perfect conditions for a predator who understood exactly how far her protection extended, how to exploit the system to her own twisted advantage. The methods attributed to Countess Bathory reveal a mind that transformed unspeakable cruelty into a perverse and horrifying art form, pushing the boundaries of human depravity. According to the chilling testimonies gathered during the 1610 investigation, her torture techniques evolved from relatively simple beatings to elaborate and ritualistic acts of pain that could last for weeks, each designed to inflict maximum suffering. Each method seemed designed not just to inflict excruciating pain, but to meticulously explore the very boundaries of human suffering, pushing her victims to the limits of endurance while maintaining their consciousness for as long as possible, prolonging their agony. The very design of the castle itself facilitated these horrific acts, transforming the ancient fortress into a veritable torture chamber. Witnesses described a ground floor chamber specifically equipped with an array of iron implements, sturdy ropes, and heavy chains, each instrument designed for a specific purpose of inflicting pain. The cold stone walls, they said, bore indelible stains that no amount of scrubbing could ever remove, permanent reminders of the horrors that had transpired within those confines. In the depths of winter, victims were stripped naked and doused with freezing water, then forced outside into the castle courtyard, where they were left to freeze to death in the bitter cold. Their frozen corpses served as macabre warnings to other servants who might contemplate disobedience or attempt to escape, a chilling testament to the Countess's ruthless cruelty. One of the most frequently mentioned torture devices was a cylindrical cage, its interior lined with razor-sharp spikes, too narrow for the victim to either sit or crouch in comfort. Young girls were locked inside this agonizing device, while the cage was hoisted high above the floor, their own body weight driving the deadly spikes deeper into their flesh with each involuntary movement, prolonging their suffering. The Countess allegedly watched these horrific sessions with the detached interest of a natural philosopher observing a scientific experiment, her face betraying no emotion as she witnessed the agonizing pain of her victims. The gruesome testimonies speak of heated iron tools applied to the most sensitive areas of the body, needles driven cruelly under fingernails and toenails, and flesh torn away with specially designed pincers. Each act of torture meticulously planned and executed. Some accounts describe a spiked throne where victims were forced to sit while hot coals were placed strategically beneath the seat, searing their flesh in a tormenting display of cruelty. The sheer variety and sophistication of these methods suggests someone who had dedicated considerable thought and ingenuity to the mechanics of pain, reveling in the power they wielded over their helpless victims. Perhaps the most disturbing and unsettling accounts were those describing acts of cannibalistic behavior, transgressing the most fundamental taboos of human society. Multiple witnesses testified to seeing fresh bite marks on the bodies of the victims, particularly on their faces, shoulders, and breasts, their flesh torn away in savage attacks. Some even claimed that the Countess would bite chunks of flesh from living victims during the prolonged torture sessions, devouring their bodies in a macabre display of dominance. Whether driven by sadistic pleasure or some deeper, more primal psychological compulsion, these acts crossed boundaries that horrified even the most hardened investigators, forever staining her legacy with an aura of unspeakable evil. The selection of victims followed chillingly clear patterns targeting the most vulnerable members of society. Young peasant girls between the ages of 10 and 16 were preferred, particularly those with no strong family connections or powerful protectors who might seek retribution for their loss. Orphans, daughters of impoverished widows, and girls from distant and isolated villages made ideal targets, their disappearances easily explained away or ignored. They were lured to the castle with false promises of positions as chambermaids or seamstresses, seemingly legitimate opportunities that desperate families could hardly afford to refuse, unaware of the horrors that awaited their daughters. Once inside the formidable walls of the castle, escape became virtually impossible, their dreams of a better life shattered. The fortress's cliff-top location and heavily guarded gates trapped victims as effectively as any dungeon, cutting them off from the outside world and placing them entirely at the mercy of their captor. Those who dared to attempt an escape were relentlessly hunted down by the Countess's loyal retainers, their hopes crushed, and returned to the castle to face especially severe and agonizing punishment, serving as a warning to others who might consider defying her. The castle operated as a closed system, a terrifying world unto itself, where the normal rules and laws of society ceased to apply, where the Countess reigned supreme, her desires the only law. The willing complicity of Bathory's inner circle reveals just how deeply systemic such abuse had become, a culture of cruelty that permeated every aspect of castle life. Her closest accomplices included Dorothea Sentis, known ominously as Dorka, an older woman who allegedly instructed the Countess in increasingly elaborate and perverse torture techniques, guiding her descent into depravity. Janos Javri, chillingly nicknamed Fick, was said to be particularly skilled at devising new and innovative implements of pain, constantly refining the instruments of torture. These individuals formed a twisted and secretive court of cruelty, each playing specific and essential roles in the torture, murder, and disposal of victims, bound together by fear and complicity. The infamous bloodbaths that earned Elizabeth her ostentatious title remain the most controversial and sensationalized aspect of her enduring legend, a macabre image that has captivated and horrified audiences for centuries. According to some accounts, she fervently believed that bathing in the blood of virgins would miraculously preserve her fading youth and restore her lost beauty, granting her a semblance of immortality. Witnesses described seeing the Countess emerge from these gruesome baths with an almost euphoric expression, her skin allegedly glowing with unnatural radiance. However, many historians remain skeptical, questioning whether these lurid stories were later embellishments added to an already horrific narrative, sensationalizing the account for dramatic effect. What seems undeniably clear from contemporary evidence is that blood played a significant role in Bathory's activities, whether for cosmetic purposes, sadistic pleasure, or some other unknown motive. Regardless of her intentions, she allegedly had her servants collect blood from tortured victims in special vessels, preserving it for her own dark purposes. Some testimonies describe disturbing rituals where blood was applied to her skin or even consumed in small quantities, a chilling act of vampirism. These acts, whether real or imagined, contributed to her transformation from a complex historical figure to a legendary monster, forever associated with blood and terror. The escalation of violence over time suggests an addiction to cruelty, a relentless craving that required ever greater stimulation to satisfy her twisted desires. Early in her widowhood, beatings and relatively minor tortures apparently sufficed to satiate her bloodlust. As the years passed, however, the methods became increasingly elaborate and sadistic. The torture sessions grew longer and more intense, and the number of victims steadily increased, feeding her insatiable appetite for suffering. Like any addiction, the desperate need for more intense experiences drove her to engage in increasingly risky and reckless behavior, ultimately leading to her inevitable downfall. As her victim count steadily rose, maintaining absolute secrecy became increasingly impossible, the walls of silence beginning to crumble under the weight of her crimes. Bodies had to be disposed of, families inevitably asked questions about their missing daughters, and even the most loyal servants began to balk at the sheer scale and brutality of the killing, their consciences burdened by the weight of their complicity. The very elaborateness of her crimes, the meticulous detail that fueled her compulsion, also created a growing mountain of evidence that would eventually break through the protective barrier of noble privilege, exposing her to the world. The systematic nature of these crimes speaks to a level of organization and planning that goes far beyond impulsive sadism, suggesting a mind capable of meticulous planning and ruthless execution. Victims were procured through established networks of procurers who actively sought out vulnerable targets. Torture sessions followed predictable patterns, carefully orchestrated to maximize pain and prolong suffering. Bodies were disposed of using tested and reliable methods, minimizing the risk of discovery. This was not random violence, but a carefully managed and sustained operation that functioned with chilling efficiency for decades, fueled by unchecked power and shielded by privilege. Understanding these methods matters not for their sensational or prurient value, but for what they reveal about the chilling intersection of power and pathology, the dark potential that lurks within the human psyche when unchecked authority is combined with sadistic tendencies. The tortures attributed to Bathory were not unique in their cruelty. Similar methods were frequently used in judicial proceedings throughout Europe, a testament to the brutal practices of the time. What made them truly exceptional was their application for personal gratification rather than state purposes, and their use against innocent and defenseless individuals rather than convicted criminals who had broken the law. The sheer volume of physical evidence of these heinous crimes would have been overwhelming in any other context, sufficient to condemn even the most powerful individual. Bones discovered scattered across the castle grounds, blood-soaked chambers that reeked of death, and a chilling array of torture implements all pointed undeniably to systematic killing. Yet for 3 long decades, this damning evidence was systematically ignored, dismissed, or conveniently explained away, buried beneath a mountain of privilege and social power. The Countess was operating within a system where the laws were malleable and the voices of the vulnerable were easily silenced. The methods of murder, while horrific, were less shocking to contemporary authorities than the challenge they posed to the rigid social hierarchy, the fear of upsetting the established order outweighing the need for justice. These detailed accounts of torture serve as more than mere historical curiosities, titillating tales of past horrors. They serve as a stark warning, demonstrating how unchecked power can manifest in unspeakable cruelty, how systemic inequality creates perfect victims, and how even the most horrific crimes can be normalized and even tolerated within certain social contexts where privilege reigns supreme. The methods matter because they reveal the methodical nature of evil when it operates without restraint, the chilling capacity of human beings to inflict unimaginable suffering on others. The first documented victim whose name has survived the relentless march of history was a 12-year-old girl named Ilona Harksey, her life tragically cut short by the Countess's cruelty. According to the harrowing testimony given by Elizabeth's laundress, Ilona was subjected to a brutal beating so severe that her body had to be hidden away until the wounds had healed sufficiently to allow her death to appear natural, masking the Countess's barbarity. This pattern of concealment and deception would continue for decades, with each successful cover-up further emboldening the Countess to escalate her crimes to even greater extremes, believing herself untouchable. Court records from 1602 mention a formal complaint filed by the Reverend Janos Poniecki regarding the suspicious death of a young woman in Bathory's service, an early warning sign that was tragically ignored. The girl had been buried hastily and without the proper religious rites, arousing the priest's suspicion. When he inquired about the circumstances surrounding her death, he was simply told that she had died suddenly of disease, a convenient explanation that masked the true horror. His formal complaint to church authorities was swiftly dismissed after the powerful intervention of Bathory allies, their influence ensuring that the truth remained buried. This early warning sign was tragically ignored, setting a dangerous precedent for official indifference and inaction. The chilling testimony of Zsuzsanna Verkoni, meticulously collected during the 1610 investigation, provides one of the most detailed and harrowing eyewitness accounts of the atrocities that occurred within Castle Čachtice. A seamstress who worked within the castle for a harrowing 3 years, Zsuzsanna described witnessing the torture and murder of dozens of young girls, their screams echoing through the stone corridors. She vividly recalled one particularly tragic victim, a 14-year-old named Anna Darvulia, who endured 2 agonizing weeks of escalating torture before finally succumbing to her injuries, her life extinguished by the Countess's relentless cruelty. Zsuzsanna's decision to remain silent for so long reflects the impossibly difficult position of the servants who witnessed these heinous crimes, trapped between fear of retribution and the unbearable weight of their guilty knowledge. Perhaps the most haunting and emotionally resonant testimony came from a survivor named Katalin Benitsky, one of the few victims to escape the clutches of the castle alive, carrying with her the scars of her ordeal. She bore permanent and disfiguring scars from the tortures she had endured, a constant reminder of the horrors she had witnessed. Katalin described being held captive in a dark cellar with 5 other terrified girls, forced to watch as they were taken away one by one for torture sessions from which they never returned, their screams haunting her waking hours. Her miraculous escape during a winter storm was nothing short of divine intervention, and her courageous testimony would prove to be crucial in building the case against Bathory, finally shattering the walls of silence that had protected her for so long. The families of the victims faced an agonizing dilemma, trapped between grief and fear, their lives irrevocably altered by the loss of their daughters. Accusing a noble of murder was an act of unimaginable audacity, itself a dangerous undertaking that could potentially result in punishment for slander or even worse. Many chose to simply accept the official explanations for their daughters' disappearances, however implausible, rather than risk incurring the wrath of the powerful Bathory family, their silence bought with fear. Those who did dare to speak out, driven by the desperate need for justice, found their concerns dismissed and their pleas ignored by authorities who were unwilling to challenge the immense power and influence of the Bathory family. One particularly tragic and heart-wrenching case involved the Sab family, members of the minor nobility who had naively sent their young daughter Erzsébet to serve at Castle Čachtice as a companion to the Countess, hoping to provide her with valuable experience and connections. When they grew increasingly concerned about her prolonged silence and requested permission to visit their daughter, they were coldly informed that she had run away with a soldier, abandoning her duties and disgracing her family. Months later, a remorseful servant secretly informed them that Erzsébet had been tortured to death for the seemingly trivial offense of accidentally breaking a mirror, a cruel and senseless act that revealed the Countess's capricious nature. Their desperate attempts to seek justice for their daughter's murder were blocked at every level of the judicial system, their pleas falling on deaf ears. The complicity of local officials becomes chillingly clear in the testimony of Benedict Deso, a castle notary who meticulously maintained detailed records of all household expenses, knowingly participating in the cover-up. He confessed to falsifying death certificates, listing the causes of death as plague or accidents, rather than the gruesome reality of torture and murder, concealing the truth behind a facade of official documentation. His meticulously kept records, seized during the investigation, revealed payments for vast quantities of lime used to dissolve bodies and bribes paid to officials who asked too many inconvenient questions, a systematic effort to suppress the truth. The role of the Countess's noble accomplices extended far beyond the walls of the castle, revealing a web of complicity and corruption that reached deep into Hungarian society. Several testimonies implicated members of the minor nobility in the procurement of victims, actively participating in the Countess's heinous crimes. These individuals would identify suitable girls in distant and vulnerable villages, arrange for their transport to the castle under false pretenses, and ensure that families who asked too many questions were silenced through a combination of bribes and veiled threats, their silence bought with money and fear. This network demonstrates how noble privilege created insidious systems of exploitation that extended throughout society, allowing evil to flourish unchecked. Medical testimony provided during the investigation offers a rare glimpse into the undeniable physical evidence of these gruesome crimes, revealing the true extent of the Countess's depravity. A skilled surgeon named Benedict Borda carefully examined several exhumed bodies and documented injuries that were undeniably consistent with prolonged torture, revealing a pattern of systematic abuse. His detailed and objective reports described broken bones, unmistakable evidence of burning, and horrific wounds that could only have been inflicted deliberately over extended periods of time, rejecting any possibility of accidental injury. This scientific approach to documenting violence was highly unusual for the era and significantly strengthens the credibility of the witness accounts, providing tangible proof of the horrors that had transpired within Castle Čachtice. The testimonies also chillingly reveal the sophisticated psychological manipulation that Bathory employed to control both her victims and her accomplices, creating a culture of fear and dependency. New servants were gradually introduced to the culture of violence within the castle, initially as passive witnesses, then as increasingly unwilling participants. Their consciences slowly eroded. This insidious grooming process created a strict hierarchy of complicity, where each person knew enough to be blackmailed into silence, but not enough to fully understand the full and terrifying scale of the Countess's crimes, creating a web of fear that bound them together. One of the most damning pieces of evidence unearthed during the investigation was a letter penned by the Countess herself discovered hidden within her private chambers, its contents revealing her cold and calculating nature. In it, she casually discussed the practical arrangements for disposing of useless servants and mentioned specific torture sessions with disturbingly casual indifference, revealing her utter lack of empathy. The authenticity of this letter has been debated by historians over the centuries, but its discovery during the initial investigation undeniably influenced contemporary opinion regarding her guilt, providing tangible evidence of her involvement. The sheer number of victims remains a hotly disputed topic, shrouded in mystery and speculation. During the trial of her accomplices, one witness chillingly claimed to have seen a list written in the Countess's own handwriting, documenting the names of 650 victims, a staggering number that speaks to the scale of her crimes. Other witnesses testified to personally witnessing the deaths of between 50 and 80 girls, their lives extinguished by the Countess's cruelty. Even the most conservative estimates, however, suggest that dozens of murders were committed within the walls of Castle Čachtice, their stories lost to history. While some accounts place the number in the hundreds, the exact and irrefutable count may never be known, as many early victims were likely disposed of without leaving any trace, their fates forever shrouded in darkness. The testimonies paint a chilling picture of escalating boldness, a growing sense of impunity that fueled the Countess's descent into depravity. Initially, her victims were almost exclusively from the servant class, their deaths easily explained away as accidents or illnesses, their lives deemed inconsequential. As the years passed without any repercussions, however, the Countess allegedly began targeting the daughters of minor gentry who had been sent to her castle for education in noble manners, an act of unimaginable audacity. This expansion of victim selection ultimately contributed to her downfall, as noble families possessed greater resources and influence to demand investigations and seek justice for their murdered daughters. The geographic spread of victims tells a chilling story of its own, revealing the expanding reach of the Countess's cruelty. Girls were recruited from an ever-widening circle around Castle Čachtice, as local villages gradually learned to keep their daughters far away from the ominous fortress, their instincts warning them of the evil that lurked within. By 1609, procurers were traveling to distant regions of Hungary in search of suitable victims, offering generous payments to desperate families in exchange for their daughters, preying on their poverty and vulnerability. This expansion of operations required more accomplices, increasing the risk of exposure and ultimately contributing to her eventual downfall. These documented cases, horrifying as they are, represent only a fraction of the true horror that unfolded within the dark walls of Castle Čachtice. For every victim whose name has managed to survive in court records and historical accounts, countless others disappeared without a trace, their stories forever lost to the relentless passage of time. Their stories, preserved in the chilling testimonies of witnesses who finally found the courage to speak out against the Countess, serve as haunting monuments to lives tragically cut short by the deadly collision of sadistic personality and unchecked power, their suffering echoing through the centuries. The investigation that finally brought Castle Čachtice under scrutiny began not from genuine concern for the murdered peasants, but from a confluence of political and financial motivations that made Elizabeth Bathory vulnerable to her powerful enemies. By 1610, she had become one of the wealthiest individuals in all of Hungary, wielding immense power and influence, holding significant debts from the crown itself. King Matthias II personally owed her late husband's estate a vast fortune for financing military campaigns against the Ottoman Turks, creating a situation where her downfall would conveniently erase these substantial royal debts, relieving the crown of its financial burden. The appointment of György III as Palatine of Hungary in 1609 marked a significant turning point in the unfolding drama, setting the stage for the Countess's downfall. Thirds, despite being Bathory's cousin through marriage, faced mounting pressure from both the Habsburg court and influential Hungarian nobles who were deeply concerned about her growing power and unchecked autonomy, viewing her as a threat to the established order. The persistent rumors of unspeakable atrocities occurring at Castle Čachtice provided the perfect pretext for taking action against someone who had become far too powerful, too wealthy, and too independent for comfort, allowing them to seize her assets and diminish her influence. On a cold December day, December 29, 1610, Thurz led a daring raid on Castle Čachtice that would become legendary in Hungarian history, forever cementing the Countess's place in the annals of infamy. His raiding party allegedly discovered a scene of active and horrific horror: a lifeless girl in the main hall, another dying victim clinging precariously to life nearby, and several other terrified girls locked in cells, their bodies bearing unmistakable signs of torture. While some historians question whether this dramatic discovery was carefully staged for maximum impact, the raid undeniably provided irrefutable evidence of systematic killing within the castle walls. The immediate aftermath of the raid revealed the intricate and often contradictory interplay of law and noble privilege, exposing the deep-seated inequalities of the feudal system. Despite the overwhelming evidence of heinous crimes, Thurz conspicuously did not immediately arrest the Countess. Instead, he engaged in delicate negotiations with her powerful family, seeking to avoid a public trial that would inevitably disgrace one of Hungary's most prominent and respected dynasties. This carefully orchestrated arrangement house arrest within the castle, rather than a formal prosecution, demonstrates how, even in the face of extreme atrocity, noble blood provided a level of protection that was simply unavailable to common criminals. The trial that followed focused not on Bathory herself, but rather on her four main accomplices: Dorothea Sentes, Ilona J., Janos Jevry, and Katalin Benitsky, scapegoats who would bear the brunt of justice while shielding the Countess from direct accountability. These commoners could be prosecuted and punished without directly challenging the fundamental structure of noble privilege, preserving the established order. Their detailed testimonies, extracted under the duress of torture, provided lurid details of the Countess's depravity, satisfying the public's morbid curiosity while protecting the corrupt system that had enabled such heinous crimes. The legal proceedings further revealed the Austrian-Hungarian authorities' primary concerns, which extended far beyond the simple pursuit of justice for murdered peasants. Questions focused as much on the intricacies of property rights and financial obligations as on the brutal murders themselves, highlighting the complex motivations behind the investigation. Investigators meticulously documented the Bathory estate's vast assets, suggesting that financial considerations played a significant role in the decision to pursue the case, their eyes on the prize. The massive debts owed by the crown to the Bathory family conveniently vanished along with Elizabeth's freedom, conveniently erasing the kingdom's financial burden. The sentences handed down to Bathory's accomplices reflected the standard judicial brutality of the era, a grim testament to the harsh realities of the time. Dorothea Sentes and Ilona J., identified as the primary organizers of the torture sessions, were condemned to have their fingers brutally torn out with red-hot pincers before being burned alive at the stake, their agonizing deaths serving as a public spectacle. Janos Javri, as a younger participant who was allegedly coerced into participating in the atrocities, was mercifully beheaded before his body was consumed by flames. Only Katalin Benitsky, whose testimony proved crucial to the investigation and who is deemed less culpable in the gruesome events, received a comparatively lenient prison sentence. The Countess herself remained in a state of legal limbo, neither formally tried nor officially convicted of any crime. Instead, she was confined to Castle Čachtice by a carefully orchestrated agreement with her family, rather than by any formal judicial sentence. This extrajudicial solution preserved the dignity of the noble family while effectively removing her from power and preventing her from causing further harm. Her children were allowed to retain their inheritance and titles, avoiding the complete ruination of their family name that would have inevitably followed a formal conviction for such heinous crimes, preserving their legacy. The political ramifications of the scandal extended far beyond the borders of Hungary, reverberating throughout Europe. The Habsburg court skillfully used the Bathory scandal as a justification to further weaken Hungarian noble autonomy, arguing, "So, the chilling tale of Elizabeth Bathory, the Blood Countess, is far more than a simple horror story. It's a stark reminder of the dangers of unchecked power, the devastating impact of social inequality, and the importance of holding even the most privileged accountable. It's a story that challenges us to examine the structures of our own societies and ask ourselves, who are we allowing to be exploited, and what are we doing to protect the vulnerable? It's a story that lingers, prompting us to consider how easily systems designed to uphold justice can be twisted into instruments of oppression." Now, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this incredibly complex and disturbing piece of history. Did anything in particular stand out to you? What questions does it raise for you? Please share your comments and join the discussion down below. Let's explore these difficult themes together. And if you found this video insightful, please consider subscribing to the channel. That way, you won't miss out on future explorations of history's dark corners and the important lessons they hold for us. Thanks for watching.